This is the geometry that we should now have, and what we need to next do is to create a complete segment of a spoke and the center and be able to rotate those all around and complete the model. And then there's some trimming to be done as well. So first of all, let's get rid of the rim because we've got that's complete already. Don't need to do anything more on that one. And we're going to use groups. So where we've got spoke F, for example, we can pick all of those objects, and we're also going to include in this surface here. So we're going to group all of those surfaces together because this whole area needs to be mirrored across the YZ plane, the symmetry plane for the spoke, and then we'll have a completed spoke. So let's try and group that, and as usual, if we try and group it, it says can't group items with different parents. So what we have to do there is to ungroup it like we've done before. Now normally I've got preserve position on, but it says that we need to set that to no to ungroup items that contain instances or symmetry. So what we're going to do is go into ungroup and say no. And so that's ungrouped this lot. Let's ungroup again. So we just keep on ungrouping until nothing's selected. So now you can see nothing's highlighted there. So now we should be able to do that properly. Group it together. So pick those objects. We're going to include that surface in there, and we're going to group that lot together. Now, if we weren't sure whether any message came up, then we can look into here, and the last message there was no problem with that. So now we should be able to pick that whole area as one object. Now I notice there's also a bit of green highlighting in there, so what we should do before we go any further, just to make sure there's no unexpected problems, is just delete all the history. We don't need the history at this stage. So that's got rid of all the history. So now we can go and pick that object. So that's the whole of that one side of the spoke, and we're going to create a duplicate of that with mirror on. We just need to make sure that we pick the right mirror plane. In our case it's the YZ. If you remember, Z is upwards and Y was the center axis of the wheel. So let's mirror that across. Now on this center area, that bit there, we can actually pick that. That's already been defined as an object, as a group. But what we're missing is we've got the trim on this side, but when we rotate the spoke around, there'll need to be a trim boundary here as well, and that will be formed from the side of that fillet there. So we could actually rotate the whole spoke, that side of the spoke around, or we can just pick these two surfaces here. In fact, it's going to be three surfaces because it's that one as well. And we need to make sure that, because we're going to rotate that around with duplicate on, but we need to make sure that the pivot point of those surfaces is actually at 0, 0, 0, or along the y-axis somewhere, otherwise it's going to rotate into a funny position. So we can always go into Windows Information window, and so we've got our square surface there, another surface here, another surface here, and below there we've got the pivot information. If these aren't open, it's just a question, because you might find it's like that, just open them up. And there's one more somewhere. In fact, that's it. So if we look at the pivot information here, the rotate pivot is at 0, 0, 0 on that surface, the same on that one, and the same on that one. So there, that's all fine. So now if we do an edit, duplicate, and we're going to rotate this object around, so it's object, and we want to rotate one copy. We want a copy, a physical copy, not an instance, and the rotation is about the y-axis, so it's going to be 0, 72 degrees, because we've got 5 spokes. In other words, The 72 comes from dividing 360 into 5 segments and 0 in Z. So that gives us that rotation there. So let's do this in wireframe, it might be easier to see. And then we can just trim that out. So we've got 3D trimming on, project, normal, and then we're going to pick the surface, we're going to pick the boundaries that we want to use. Notice that's green at one end and pink at the other end, so it's saying there's a curve on surface there that finishes at that edge, but it doesn't finish at another edge here. In fact, I've got chain select on, which I hadn't noticed, but that's actually taken us right across there, and so it's green all the way along there. And now we can pick the area that we want to keep, which is that one, and press the space bar to complete the trim. And then we can get rid of these surfaces because we don't need those. That was just to enable us to trim that out correctly. So the other thing that we want to do, we've got this back surface and the spoke itself, and if we shade that up again, you can see that they intersect each other. And so what we have to do is trim one back to the other. Now we can't trim this whole center bit at the moment because again we don't have the complete intersect here, so we could take this surface here and let's just check the pivot point is correct, which it is 0, 0, 0, rotate pivot, edit, duplicate object. We're going to use the same parameters, so it's 72 degrees about the y-axis. There's one copy and we OK that. So now we've got a complete trim boundary there, which we need. So we can trim, we could trim that back to those two, but it would be better, what would be better to do would be to create the intersect. And the reason is because in the intersect menu we can put both curves on surface on. So if we pick all of the surfaces that we want to intersect, so it's all of those, then press the space bar, and then the intersecting surfaces are going to be that one, and can you just about see that the curve on surface has appeared there, and then we want this one and we want this one. So that curve on surface is a bit difficult to see, so we're going to change that colour a bit to something much easier to see. So there's our curve on surface going all the way around there, and because we had both on, you'll find that everywhere there's two curves on surface in fact. So there's one on that rear surface and there's one on the center surface, for example. This one we don't need because we just rotated that around to give us a trim boundary, so we can get rid of that, but the curve on surface will still be there. And then we can go around trimming that. So with shading on, let's go into trim. We don't need 3D trimming on because we've got our curves on surface there that we want anyway. So we pick the surface that we want to trim, green dots everywhere, which is good news. Pick the bit that we want to keep, which is that side. And again, this one here, for example, we can pick that surface, pick the side we want to keep, pick that surface, the side we want to keep, that one, the bit that we want to keep. So that's now all trimmed out. And the other thing that we want to do is do the same thing on the back of that. So we can pick that surface, and I'll just pick it over here, and that's trimmed that out to that edge, and the same with that one. So that's all nicely trimmed out now, all trimmed together. We need to do the same thing on the other side. Now this is another one where we need this little bit of the surface. So if we take this surface and we'll do an edit, duplicate, object, this time we need a minus 72 because we need to go and rotate it the other way. And in fact we've actually got that edge in there. So we'll do another intersect. So we're going to intersect between these back surfaces, that one, space bar. Now don't pick this center one because we've already trimmed that back. So if we pick that one, it's possible we'll get a curve on surface that's not very good, and so on that edge we actually want to use project, but on these ones where it clearly intersects we can use the intersect function. So that should have created all our curves on surface. So we'll trim all of those out so we can see what we've got. So that one, that one, that one, that one, and then the back surface. That back surface won't trim at the moment, because if we try and trim it, you can see there's a pink dot there because we haven't got that bit of the curve on surface in there, but this one will. If you find that you can't see the bit of the surface that you want to keep, you can actually pick the bit that you want to discard. So if I pick that, rather than picking the space bar, if you say discard, that will get rid of the bit that you didn't want. So that's an alternative way of doing it. So this surface in here we need to trim back in this area, and so we first of all got to project that edge on there. So that's going to be curve on surface normal, and we want to pick the surface that we want to project onto, pick the space bar, pick the projecting curve or edge, which actually is that one because it's actually in two pieces, so we didn't want that one, we just want that one, and then press the space bar, and we should now have a curve on surface there, which we have. Let's just take the shading off, so not very easy to see, but there is a curve on surface there. We can verify that when we go into the trim. So if we go into trim, make sure 3D trimming's off. Now we can see green dots everywhere, so that's good news. So that's the bit. We'll turn that back on to keep. So we'll make sure that we keep the right bit and don't discard it. Now, if we've done that by mistake, so by mistake I've actually kept the bit that I wanted to throw away. So sometimes you can do a Control Z in certain functions, but if you're several stages down the line, use untrim, and we can say untrim stages last. I don't want to delete any of the curves on surface because they're all fine, and so I can then say go and just undo that last operation. And then if we go back into trim, and I'm going to pick the bit that I want to keep, which is that one, make sure that's on keep there, and then the space bar will do a keep rather than a discard. So now we've got that all trimmed out. There's some curves there which we don't need, so let's just make those invisible. If there's any curves lying around, we're going to object display invisible, so it just takes them out of the scene. Now this bit of center surface we don't need either, that one there. So we should find that that is one segment. There's two flat surfaces in the middle which we haven't trimmed to anything, and they don't form part of the model at the moment, but everything else we should be able to rotate and duplicate. But before we do that, let's just do a file save. Now my file saving naming convention is to put in the date backwards, which means it comes out alphabetically as well as date order, and then the time. But it's entirely up to you, but I would highly recommend saving models on a very regular basis. So now let's go, and we'll do this one bit at a time just in case there's any things that we haven't foreseen. So I'm going to pick those two bits, that's the spoke and part of the rim, and we should find, because we've grouped those, that the pivot points of those objects, so there's the rotate pivot point there for one of them, and the rotate pivot point there, the other one. The pivot point should be at 0, 0, 0. So let's go into duplicate objects, and we're going to do 72 degrees. We'll take the minus out of there, and we want 4 copies because we're going to end up with 5 spokes altogether. So this one counts as number 1, and then we've got 4 copies to go with it, and that's given us 4 copies of that. We'll do the same process on the center hub, which is that one there, and we can include the back surface. So I'm picking these as objects because those are grouped together, and this little surface here. So all of those can be rotated 5 times now. So if we go into Edit, Duplicate Object, because I've set up the parameters already, I only need to press the button and that's done. So that's all complete. Now the only thing that we haven't done is there's a couple of square surfaces in the center there which need trimming back to the holes. So let's go into take hardware shade off. So for example, we've got this surface here. We need to trim that to the circular shape there. So we're going to trim. We use 3D trimming with project and normal on, and we can also put chain select on. Very handy, because all we've got to then do is pick one of those edges and it finds all of the connecting edges, and then we simply pick the bit that we want to keep, press the space bar, and that's trimmed. And the similar sort of thing on the back surface. So we've got that surface there, that's the one we want to trim, and then we can go use chain select on that back edge there, that one there, that one there, that one there, that one there. So chain select is really useful, otherwise we'd have had to go and pick each of those edges individually, which would have been very time consuming. And we also want to trim it to this edge here. Again, chain select is just finding all of the connecting edges, and then the bit that we want to keep is the bit that's inside here. So we click on there, hit the space bar, and that's trimmed it. Difficult to see without the shading on, so let's shade that up. So now you can see we've got holes there. We rotate that around and it's all been trimmed to the outside as well. And the final part of the assembly is just to bring the rim back, which we know is a complete part there. So there's our complete wheel. So as usual, we're going to save it to this critical point. And then we're just going to tidy this up a bit. So you can see there's some different colours there, so let's pick all of the surfaces, and if we go into the visualization workflow there, currently a lot of the surfaces are this default colour, but if we wanted to assign another colour, say this steel satin, we just pick all of the surfaces, pick that shader that we want, and then assign it. So that gives us that. And the other thing that we can do is we can create a new layer, which is just going to be called final. So we can put, at this point, we can put everything on the one layer. Assign that there. And you notice that some of this is highlighting in a green colour, and that implies there's some history there, so we want to delete all the construction history. We also want to get rid of any null nodes, so these are nodes that contain no geometry. And if we want to then get rid of all the layers that we have no data in, we can say layers, delete unused layers. So that just gets rid of some of the layers that no longer have stuff in them. And of course you can go through the layers and get rid of anything that you don't need. Or we can output, if we want to, we can take that whole wheel, pick everything, and do an export active as, and then create a wire file which contains only that wheel. And if we want to see it properly, we just press F12, and that will take all of the lines off it. So that's our wheel.